IE-UFRJ by Mr. Charles Frederico from Ideas, Carlos Aguiar from OXFAM, Camila Gramkow from CEPAL, and my colleague, Luiz Fernando. So I will give the floor right now to Charles. Charles, please. 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
It will be very short.
Very short. Not take 10 minutes.
Well, first, thanks for inviting me, and congratulations for setting this up. I just want to take some time to say a little bit about ideas, because we welcome the collaboration with the Institute to organize this. I see that OXFAM is also involved in this collaborative way of getting this conversation going. Is very welcome. So I like to appreciate this opportunity on behalf of Ideas. So Ideas, International Development Economics Associates, was created in 2001 at a conference that was organized by the United Nations Research and Social Development and RIS. It was then led by a Malawian Central African economists called Tandika and Kandawiri. Tandika passed on. And it was on the theme of rethinking development economics. In 2001, as you probably know, there was already nearly 2 decades of the Latin American experience in neoliberalism, the lost decade. And most of Africa had 10 years of neoliberalism. This was all the periods in which economic development, not only economic development, but economic theory experienced an onslaught. So only thing that mattered were getting prices right, shrinking the productive and social role of the state, but ensuring that the state is strong and repressive enough to rewrite the rules for neoliberalism. The effect of that in many of our societies, Africa in particular, I think when I come to Latin America and South Asia to some extent, you get an encouragement. There is still some heterodoxy in thinking about economics. In African universities, the economic curriculums were fully rewritten. A good part of Southeast Asian universities, other than China, the economic curriculum were completely rewritten. So it's very difficult to find. I mentioned, I came here very briefly to just sit and as I covered a presentation about post-Keynesianism. Very hard to find in African universities, in particular, any reference to Kaleski, Davis. And that's completely out of the window. So I think this was a moment for reflecting on both the political and intellectual impact of the onslaught of neoliberalism at that time, and its impact on economics, and the way that economics and assets, science for development was being reshaped. One other thing was observed in this community, which is that in that struggle for ideas, the contribution of scholars from the global south to the pool of knowledge had shrunk, and was completely, even, and we know that very well in the economics journals. So was very minimized. And it was important to start to increase, to do something to support intellectuals, academia from the global south to contribute, increase their contribution to the global knowledge pool and so on. That, of course, also is necessary for ensuring a competition of ideas and fighting the dominance of neoliberalism. neoliberalism and its translation in economics curricula are being declared as a dominance of neoclassical economics. So this was the context in which ideas was created. So a number of people who are still quite around ideas, some names you know, Jayati Ghosh, Jome Kwame Sundaram, Professor Prabhat Patnaik. So Prabhat is a Marxist economist, a very well known Marxist economist, got together with Nika and really go to create an idea. So the formal network of scholars from the global south. And it ran as informally for nearly 2 decades until a decision was made to sort of give it a bit more push for decentralize its presence as much as possible so we can increase the size of the network. We can make a bigger push at making a heterodox approaches to economics and economic analysis a bit more prominent in all of the 3 major regions of the global south. So 3-4 years ago, we started to institutionalize it. Secretariat had to move from India, partly because of the nature of politics in India. Modi's Indian politics, so they had to move. And it ended up in Accra, West Africa, and Ghana. So I headed full time. We have a network of a small team of staff, maybe 10 or 12 of us across all 3 continents. But we are focusing on 3 things, 3 main things. One, to facilitate research, and so we do support research. And we use conferences as a means also of stimulating papers. So we encourage papers. And then we can turn those into conference papers, into short opinion pieces, and then into full-fledged papers. So these conferences, research conferences and knowledge production go together. We do, for the last 3 or 4 years, doing this around 4 main topics. Resource extraction of 1, finance and the financial architecture in the 2nd. The 3rd is the whole theme of feminist economics. And the 4th is the planetary crisis. But we are also introducing the theme employment, work, especially in its relationship with changing technology. So that's one big area of research, of our work. The second is training. So we are encouraging these short courses, try and get them as many as possible going, see how we can institutionalize them. But we also run a certificate course, a full year certificate course in research in political economy. We run it physically in New Delhi, but it's open so that half the students are usually Indians and the other half are from across the global south, online. We do have quite a few Latin American students who do that course. The final thing we do, apart from training, is strategic engagement with some of the public policy spaces and so on. Now, I'm saying all of these because we are hoping that you will generate some interest and ideas. Visit our website so that you can contribute. We can increase the network. We can draw on your knowledge and expertise for all of these things that I've explained. It can only survive through committed volunteerism around common efforts of making knowledge and heterodox. Okay.
I will follow the order of the program, so I'll give the floor to Luiz Fernando. 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah. Just.
Well, good evening to everybody. First of all, I would like to welcome everybody to take part of this workshop. And I would like to, before my presentation, to say that this workshop was only possible with the efforts of three Latin American colleagues that had a very fantastic work. That is Leandro Bona, here, Leonardo Rojas, is there, and Sergio Martin, that is ready. So, big thank you for all of this. I would say that when we join the Latin America, our effort, we can do things. So that is this workshop about. Well, I will present some of my thinking about this theme, that's the challenges of sustainable finance for Latin American, from the South. I would say that I'm not exactly a specialist on sustainable finance. I am working only recently with the theme, the subject that we created recently here in the Institute, the Brazilian Center for Sustainable Finance. And I am a specialist on financial macroeconomics and financial system, that I am oriented my research recently for this field of research. So it is considered that this is a very initial thinking about and more theoretical. So the outline of my presentation will first talk about the challenges for financing climate change. Then I will define what is green finance, and I will compare with the concept of sustainable finance. That is the concept that we work, that we prefer, than green finance. I will talk about different actors and financial tools related to the sustainable finance. I will talk about a sustainable developmental convention. And finally, I will focus on the question that is how financial system can be functional to support sustainable development. I will use the post-Keynesian approach that I have developed in other works, in this case applying to the problem related to sustainable development. Okay, well, first of all, everybody that works with this subject know that there is very big evidence of the impact of climate change in biodiversity loss, and a lot of institutions has pointed out that it had documented rising temperature, intensified at extreme weather events, habitat destruction, animal species extinction at unprecedented rates. And the urgency of these issues is underscored by the scientific consensus that the world is rapidly approaching irreversible typing points. Well, what's the main challenge in this case for sustainable finance is how to mobilize enough resources for such tasks. Well, first, I will focus with some focus related to the green finance. There is a special work of Daniela Gago, that's what we call it Wall Street consensus, that exploit this idea that the financial actors exploit the green transition for the risking investment by states that do not effectively redirect global green financial flows where they are most needed. So there is this gap that I will focus this more on my presentation. Well, the other concern that was discussed in the former section here in this workshop is that global South countries in need of green transition finance do not receive enough capital flows amidst a flood of green money on the global north. So there is this problem of the lack of the finance in the global south. Also, there are some difficulties related to the standardization, harmonization of global green finance classification, standard, and taxonomy. I know that, particularly in Brazil, there is the implementation of the taxonomy that's very important to classify the projects that is financed in terms of green or not green projects, but there are a lot of work in terms of to define exactly what is green and what is not green. And in consequence, there is this problem of the greenwashing that is very present in a lot of allocation of portfolio of the global funds. Well, I will use here a recent work of Babic that he defined green finance, and we will read here as investment equity bonds, loans, and sometimes including fiscal measures such as tax breaks and subsidies that aim either mitigate ecologically harmful energy generation, increase its ecological sustainability, enable its adaptation to climate change. So it is interesting that this work showed the different actors that have some role in the green finance. That some are public ones, other are private ones. That is, for in the case of finance, ministry and treasurers, public development banks, multilateral development banks, state control programs, central banks, and now the private ones, large asset managers and private banks. So I will not see all in detail this table, but just to see that there are some specific characteristics of each one of any different role of these different actors, and with the use of different instruments like finance minister and treasurer, with use of tax breaks, subsidies, grants, public development bank, direct loans, equity investments, multilateral development banks, concessional loans, grants, technical assistance with more international focus, state control programs that include grants, low interest loans, technical cooperation, central banks, more related to the green monetary policy, bond purchase, reserve requirements. Also, large asset managers that include instruments, equity funds, bond funds, ETFs. And finally, private banks that provide loans, green bonds, and act as a buyer of green bonds and depository risk. So we have all this actor with different roles in the. I will particularly focus in my presentation and two of these important actors, that is development bank and central banks. Well, also in this paper there is, it's a bit hard to read here, different instruments that mostly green bonds, green equity, green loans, concessional finance, and blended finance. Each one, it is interesting that the author exploits both the possibilities of each instrument and the problems related to these instruments. For instance, the green bonds. Green bonds have this potential of pushing green projects, but there is the problem of that these bonds are mostly concentrated in the north and not in the south. There is green equity as well. The green loans is important that it can direct finance to of green projects. But there is this problem of, for instance, of the taxonomy, how to define what is a green project, what is a brown project, and there is this problem. Concessional finance, of course, it is very important for low-income countries, but there is the problem that in general it is very volatile, because it depends on the countries and also the multilateral institutions, the policies, specific policies. And for instance, the case of the Trump, American president, reduced concessional funds a lot. And financing is important, that is very related to what Jacob has mentioned, the Wall Street consensus is the blended finance that mix private and public resource, but with this focus in de-risking the private finance in order to fund the green finance gap. So there is this betting of the multilateral development banks that as you have the lack of resource in the south, in particularly, there are a lot of risks involved in this project that the government, with the use of public funds, can de-risk part of this investment with the use of public funds. So you can attract. And the criticism about this sort of instrument is that the countries, who decide the allocation of the resources? The private financial institutions. So it's not defined by a national policy of a country. And the other criticism about this instrument is that also at least the government is using public funds that could be used directly in national programs by different countries. So, what's the difference between the green finance and sustainable finance? That I prefer, and that's the reason that we created a center for sustainable finance, not green finance, is that we understand that green finance is a more narrow concept that is more related in mobilizing resources to support climate transition, while there is other dimensions that is the structural change. So the sustainable finances included this dimension of the structural change oriented to sustainability, such as bioeconomy and green manufacturing, and also this important dimension of the just transition, that is the process of shifting toward a low carbon, environmentally sustainable economy in a way that is fair, inclusive, and equitable. Well, Gabor, as I mentioned, she developed this idea that this new global agenda for financial system is what she called Wall Street consensus, that is centering the risky assets to attract global investors financed with public resource. And her criticism about this consensus, that according to her is being followed by the multilateral development banks, is that it's privileging the protection of financial flows from environmental regulatory measures and betting in the ability to mobilize private capital, but at the same time it reduces the space for national public policies, restricting the ability of states to act more actively to stimulate just ecological transitions. Okay. And she also the authors they suggest a topology of the green macroeconomic regimes that includes one more neoliberal, that is carbon shock therapy, that this low use of public spending, with this debate of the use of the discipline on capital, making use of strong carbon pricing with high market discipline. That there is what they call it weak de-risking, that is exactly use of the state assuming part of the risk and guarantee expected return of investor. And there is another modality that is the robust de-risking. That the difference here is that you have a medium public spending, a moderate discipline on capital, and finally what they call a big green state. That here the states leads with large public investment and planning, with active role for central banks and public banks, and also with the use of active industrial policy. I will focus my presentation more in this dimension of the big green states. Well, just to conclude, let me focus on this concept of functionality of the financial system, that is related to the idea that the bank creates endogenously liquidity in the economy that sanction the decisions of expenditure of the agents. And so they create liquidity, that they are not only financial intermediary, but they create new power of purchase. And also there is this dimension of Minsky financial fragility hypothesis. That's the economy, capitalist economy in the expansion, they have the tendency to fragility. And so we with the mix of this both approach, we can arrive in the idea of the functionality of the financial system. That I will quote here: financial system is functional for development process when it spans the use of existing resources in the economic development process with a minimum possible increase in financial fragility and other imbalance that could halt the growth process for purely financial reasons. So here is that two important dimensions, that is spending use of existing resources for economic development, but at the same time, a minimum possible increase in financial fragility. So there is also, we know that there is the specific risk related to the climate. That is the physical risks and the transition risks. That one is related to extreme weather, and the transition risk arises from the transition of an economy to the low carbon economy. And the Carney, that is currently the Prime Minister of Canada, that was former the President of Central Bank of Canada and also England, he developed the idea that there is a paradox that when that success is a failure, that means that moving too quickly to a low carbon economy could materially undermine financial stability, triggering a cycle of loss with stranded assets. So you have this problem, how to deal with this sort of risk. And I will just to talk about okay, just 1 minute more. I suggest with the use of a precautionary approach to financial policy. That is the idea that with the use of precautionary principles that encourage preventive policies to protect the environment in face of uncertainty. And such approach requires ambitious financial policy intervention, promoting proactive measures based on the recognition of systemic and irreversible risks, and that central banks can have an important role in inducing financial institutions to support green projects. So the idea of greening monetary policy, that is the implementation of proactive measures by central bank. There are lots of measures that includes macroprudential policy, increase of capital adequacy requirements, use of quantitative restrictions on lending, capital adequacy frameworks as well. But it's important to point out the fact that this means to change the role of the central bank. That is not only with the idea of that is oriented to just financial price stability, but also in the function to reduce the possibility of financial crisis, to also to include the idea that environment risks can have effects on the financial system and also to monetary policy. And finally, the role of the development banks that are important. Mazzucato developed this idea of mission-oriented, that in the case of sustainable developments, the public development banks are important actors as they can create and model markets more than to fix it them. So in particular, and I think that just to finish it, it's important that such banks goes beyond the existence of market imperfection and failure. So this is one focus that the role of development bank should be oriented just in case of the market failures as second best solution, but in our view, it should have a more active role that included guide private choice and contribute to creating new areas for green investment. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luiz Fernando. I will give the floor to Camila. Please, Camila.
Hey, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm especially happy because I consider myself a daughter of this institute. This is where I had my master's degree, so it's a real pleasure, Professor Fred, Professor Fernando, Professor Margarita, to be here. My heart is really happy at this moment. Everything that I say here today that is good is their responsibility, and everything that is not is my fault, so bear that in mind. Also, very happy to see Professor Charles here, lovely to see you again. And it's so wonderful to see the heterodox network being expanded and strengthened presently. Also, special greeting to Carlos Aguiar, lovely meeting you. So I'll use a few minutes that I have to present to you an idea that I think most of you have heard a lot, which is the big push for sustainability and how we are looking on at how to finance transformative investments for a different future for Latin America and the Caribbean. Yeah, I'll go as far as I can within the minutes that I have, but I'm open to keep discussing with you, to keep building this together, and giving a spoiler alert from the beginning. This is an open agenda. This is a process that is being built as we speak. We are talking about a humanitarian challenge, about how humankind will survive on this planet. And we're also talking about how the global south, not just Latin America and the Caribbean, but how the global south can develop economically, move up the economic value chain, have a fairer and bigger space on global trade and in the global economic system. And we're also talking about equality from a social perspective. So the challenges are shared. We do not have all the answers. And I'm confident that spaces such as this one, we are in one of the most important houses of heterodox thinking, not just in Brazil, Latin America, and in the world. And I can say that having studied here in my master, it blew my mind completely in a very positive way. It is very worrying that increasingly the economics discipline is becoming more and more closed. So the students are having increasingly less access to plural economics, to post-Keynesian, to Caldorian, to feminist economies, to ecological economies, and this is very worrying. The field is becoming poorer. We are not being, the discipline is not being capable to prepare the students and the future generation of economists to deal with the most important challenges of our era. So let's keep working together on this philosophy. So the big push for sustainability approach, as you know, worldwide we are seeing popping new concepts and proposals. We all heard about the Green New Deal, we all heard about green growth, low carbon recovery. Many concepts are popping around the world. CEPAL, ECLAC in English, but I prefer CEPAL, has its own proposal, which departs from and is guided towards Latin America and the Caribbean, and this makes all the difference, as we will see. The approach is based on three main axes, and I know that many of you have heard this before, but it's a live concept. It's a live conceptual approach, and we are currently in the process of preparing Big Push 2.0, which is a new conceptual framing of the Big Push based on the learning that we had over the course of the last 10 years, upon which we have been devoted to researching and understanding this concept. So the Big Push approach is based on three main axes: a diagnosis axis, a perspective, and a proposition, which I will detail a bit more. So on the diagnosis, we look at what are the main defining trends and characteristics, looking at the past of Latin American and Caribbean countries. And what we see is that the region is entrapped, it is locked within at least three developmental traps. The low growth capacity trap, so in the economic dimension, the region is not being successful. Actually, if we look at the average GDP growth of the last 10 to 15 years, it's already a lower average than the last decade of the 1980s. So from an exclusively economic perspective per se, the development styles of the region are not delivering on economic performance. From a social perspective, the region is entrapped on a high inequality and low social cohesion trap. Although the region has had important progress at the beginning of the century, it still is the region with the highest inequality in the distribution of income in the world. So the region has not been able to overcome this important structural capability. And we also identified a third developmental trap, which is the limited institutional capacities. The states are fragile, either because they don't have fiscal resources or they don't have human resources, or the capabilities that the state have are not enough to address these very challenges. Those three traps, they reinforce each other, creating a vicious cycle that we identify as CEPAL, that the region is approaching a new lost decade for development. We then look at I'll not talk about the 10 developmental gaps, but if we look from a SDG, from a sustainable development perspective, every year CEPAL prepares a report in which we assess how the region is doing in terms of each of the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is the report that was presented this year at the Forum of the Countries of Sustainable Development in Latin America in Santiago, in our headquarters. And what we identify, looking at the green figures, is that only 23% of the SDG targets are on track to be delivered by 2030 in Latin America and the Caribbean. The green ones represent the targets that are moving in the right direction at the right pace to be delivered. The ones in yellow represent those that are in the right direction. The countries are moving in the right direction, but not at an enough pace to meet the targets. The one in red are the ones that are moving backwards, that are setting back in terms of what would be expected, and the gray ones are the ones that we cannot measure currently. So from a diagnosis perspective, looking at the past, this should be already enough motivation for us to think about a different future. The countries should be looking at building a different development model. But then we also look at a prospective scenario, looking into the future, looking at the same variables and categories, what would happen in a scenario of climate inaction. And what I want you to remember from this, will not be enough time to go deeper into that, is that climate change is not neutral in terms of development. Every single problem that we identified in terms of development gaps, development traps, will be deepened in a scenario in which climate change is not addressed. The low economic growth capacity, for instance. We will all recall here the extreme weather events that we witnessed last year in Rio Grande do Sul, for instance. CEPAL prepared the estimates of the economic damage of the flooding that caused not just the loss of human lives, but over 90 billion reais in economic damage and loss. Climate change is not neutral from a distributive perspective either. It is the most poor and the most vulnerable, the ones that will suffer the most from the impacts of extreme weather events. It is the most poor and the most vulnerable that will live on the side hills that will suffer landslides. It is the poor and the vulnerable that will live on riverbanks subject to floodings and so on and so forth. Recalling what Raul Prebisch, I always like to recall these notes, and it's very impressive because he produced a text on the developmental consequences of the environmental crisis in Latin America in 1980, when he did not have at least 1/100th of the evidence that we have currently about those impacts. And what he identified, and this is what we want to say when we say that climate change is not neutral from a development perspective, is that we will not face new problems. Climate change will aggravate the very problems that we are already familiar with. We are very far away, we, humankind, are very far away from where we should be in terms of addressing climate change. In this graph, and I suggest everyone that is interested in this field, looking at climate change, be familiar with the IPCC reports. This is where we get the physical evidence. This is where we understand what is going to happen in a scenario without action and what must be done in order to achieve climate Paris mitigation goals. So in this graph we can see, here you can see the time frame from 2000 to 2100, and here we can see annual emissions of greenhouse gases. If it had started pre-industrial era, we would see the famous J-shaped curve. It's almost a vertical increase in terms of annual greenhouse gas emissions, but here, looking only at this century exclusively, we can see that the current climate commitments implemented by the countries do not meet the net zero emissions pathway that the countries should be at. This is the first, another thing that I want you to recall. When we talk about being serious about climate change, what the physical science tells us, we are at a university. I understand that all of us share the belief in the scientific methods. We believe that this is a legitimate and relevant way of looking at problems. So what does the physical evidence about climate change tells us? We have to reduce, absolutely, we have to achieve net zero emissions in order to contain climate change. If we want to achieve 1.5, we have to achieve it by 2080. If we want to achieve a 2 degrees Celsius heating by the end of the century, if we want to achieve 3, 4, 5, it doesn't matter. At some point, wherever humanity agrees that it wants to be, it will have to achieve net zero emissions. It's not optional, it's what needs to be done. And what this means for us, we are here at a workshop on sustainable finance from the global south towards COP30. This means that the entirety of the economy will have to be decarbonized. This means deploying all low carbon technologies that we have available for all of the sectors, across all sectors, and of course it's important to discuss polluting sectors and green sectors, but we're talking about the whole of the economy approach. And those sectors that do not have technologies to reduce completely their emissions, we will have to capture and storage greenhouse gases. This is how we get to net zero. And this translates in this workshop as investments. There is no possibility that global economies will decarbonize completely if we do not mobilize a vast sum of investments in a portfolio. We will have to use all of the technologies and practices that we have at hand across all sectors. At a global level, it is estimated that around 6.3 and 6.7 trillion per year by 2030 needs to be met. In the LAC region, according to CEPAL's estimates, the region needs to invest at least 2.1 trillion and 2.8 trillion to decarbonize by 2030. And this push in itself, and bringing this discussion to the big push for sustainability, this vast amount of investments are the most important driver of demand, the most important multipliers of demand are from the investment components in demand. So this in itself already represents a big push in terms of dynamizing economic growth, dynamizing the economy. But it's not just about that. What we have learned, looking at the big push for sustainability, is that although green and decarbonizing investments can drive growth in the long term, and indeed models show so, In order for low carbon investments to become a driver of structural transformation, meaning creating an economy that creates more jobs, better paid jobs, that provides productive inclusion. Let's remember, in Latin America and the Caribbean, around a third of the population lives in poverty. And half of the population that is economically active and inserted in the job markets, they are in informality. So when we talk about better distribution in Latin America, it's fundamental that we talk about creation of more better paid jobs. So in order for low carbon investments, resilient investments to deliver on this, to be able to create jobs, we have to talk about productive development, about industrial policies, about building capacities. And I'll put this in a very simple way so that we can all follow, and this implies, has implications on financing as well. If we, as most Latin American and Caribbean countries are doing the transition today, they are indebting themselves in foreign currency. There are a lot of countries in the region that are issuing green bonds, sustainable development bonds, sustainability-linked bonds. So they're increasing their indebtedness in in a foreign currency. So that increases the financial vulnerabilities in themselves, and using those funds to finance imported technologies, to buy imported electric buses, to buy imported solar photovoltaic panels, to buy imported wind power generators, and so on and so forth. So it's a double vulnerabilization, if that word exists. It's a financial vulnerabilization, and it's an increase of the vulnerability in terms of the external, the foreign dependency on technology. Second message, so first message, climate change is not neutral from a development perspective. Second message, if we do make the transition, and it is a better scenario than not doing so, because we have to remind, we are talking about the existence of humankind on this planet, so it's better to do it. But the low carbon transition in itself is not spontaneously a development agenda. It can be, and I will end with that because we will have more time, and this is what the Big Push for Sustainability tries to do. What are the prerequisites? What is the mix of policies? What is the portfolio of investments? What is that we have to do in order to translate the low carbon agenda, the mitigation agenda, which is urgent, which is necessary, which is undisputable? But how can we use this push that is so urgent, that is so important, to finally have structural transformation in Latin America and Caribbean, to create jobs, to move up the value chains, to increase economic complexity, to build competitiveness, to become strengthened players in foreign markets. Latin America and the Caribbean has immense potential, and so does African countries on the global technological green race. Of course, the risk is there that the region, that the global south, again becomes more peripheralized in the green technological race by becoming a provider of green commodities. There is this risk, and again, intention needs to be there. There needs to be intention, there needs to be state-led framework of policies in order to orchestrate the transition in a way that the region can be better inserted internationally. One of the sectors that stands out and in which the region already is very competitive and a relevant player in global markets is biofuels. In ethanol, in biodiesel, in sustainable aviation fuels, so we do not depart from zero. I will not have the time to go into more details, but you will have access to the strategic areas. I believe that Flavia is here, I'm not sure if she's still around, but we produced a report specifically addressing how to finance the big push for sustainability. So once having identified what is the portfolio of sectors, how much it costs, how do we then finance and mobilize those investments? I invite you all to read it through. I will not have time to go through the details, but to end with perhaps, and I think that my role here is, as usual, to end with a message of hope. Brazil is the home of COP30 this year. As you know, the COPs are the most important multilateral spaces to discuss climate change. The fact that it's being hosted in Brazil, it means that it is the Latin American and Caribbean COP. It is the COP of the Global South. There has been many editions, perhaps too many editions of COP in the Global North. So now is the time for the Global South to put forth their agendas, their messages, not just at COP in itself, but thinking about building a legacy upon which we can work after COP30. So to end with a positive note, we have conducted estimates on what the big push for sustainability could deliver. Not going into too many details, but essentially we simulated a policies to induce investments in a portfolio of transformative sustainable investments, and what our estimate shows is that the region, Latin American, Caribbean, can grow at a higher rate than in a business as usual scenario. This increased growth is led by investments, by construction. Importantly, there is job creation, but the wage increases at faster pace than jobs, which means that the jobs that are being created are better paid than average in the region. And finally, these can be achieved, these important socioeconomic results can be achieved with a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that is faster and more ambitious than the current commitment of the countries in the region. I'll end with some further information and some of our reports for you, and looking forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Camila. I pass the floor to Carlos Aguiar.
Thank you, Frederico.
15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Frederico. Thanks so much to invite me to this activity. It's a pleasure for me to share this panel with Fernando and Camila, with all of you, of course. I prepared some reflections about the current situation when we discuss the economic model and this debate about sustainable finance. My idea is to discuss and to exchange with all of you some ideas and to create a common reflection, because in fact I don't have conclusions about the current situation in the global and regional level. My idea is to exchange with you challenges, but at the same time possible ways in terms of what we'll do the way when we discuss the next negotiations, thinking about the COP30 and next steps in climate change. And I recognize that I have an additional challenge because I prepare my notes in Spanish and I need to read in Spanish and to speak in English, and it will be a very challenge for me, but it's okay, I will try to do. One reflection that I want to introduce is why OXFAM is working about climate inequality. And this is maybe the main message that OXFAM is using in the debate, in the international debate about the climate crisis in the world. And this is because we are thinking about what are the conditions that we have around the world when you combine the current inequalities and the climate emergency that we have. And our idea is that the current crisis is not a typical crisis that we discuss in another moment of the political or the economy history in the planet. the combination or the links between inequalities and climate crisis or emergency is a new kind of crisis. And we need to discuss what happened with these instruments, with these tools that we have when we discuss about the international situation, but in a new conditions, totally new conditions in the world. And this is because for us it's absolutely important to discuss the asymmetries when we are talking about emissions and vulnerabilities, and why some countries are using the most important part of the emissions, the emissions, and why some countries suffer the most relevant impacts when we think about the climate situation. And what is the problem, and why all discussion, why all debate that we are doing about sustainable finance or green finance or another topics that we have in the international agenda are not working to resolve this kind of problem, because we have the most relevant information is with us. The most important data that we have to discuss and to create policies to address the hunger or to address inequality is with us. This is not the problem. But this is because we are discussing in OXFAM what happened when we discuss the asymmetries in power in the relationships between North and South countries, and the relationships between the elites and the communities in the countries, in the national level. And this is because at the same time, for us, one of the most important challenges that we are discussing at the moment in Latin America is what develop and for who is the development that we need in the region. These kind of questions maybe are typical debates in some areas, but for us, when we discover that money is available in the moment for different perspectives, maybe the most clear example is the war. We have conditions to create new problems around the world in topics like the war and support, financial topics related to the war around the world. But why we don't have these conditions to address hunger or poverty? This is because in our debate, we are in a discussion to try to say in the current conditions, sustainable is not possible. Sustainable is not possible in the current conditions, and we need to discuss the development models in our countries, and we need to discuss the economy around the world, and in particular with all these global mechanisms that we are talking at the moment, particularly relevant in Brazil when we are talking about the BRICS or the G20, and now because the climate change conference is coming. But in fact, the current condition for development is, in terms of the national perspective, is the same condition for terrible situation for the communities and particular territories, in the countries. And we have two different perspectives in a same country. This is the situation in Brazil. Now, when we discuss the next COP30 in Belém de Pará, we have a very big discussion in Brazil about the condition of the people in Belém de Pará. Not just social condition and economic condition, but the environment condition in the country, and political decision in terms of the environment condition, and decision that we need to adopt it in these international negotiations. At the same time that the governments are talking about the necessity to the low carbon economies, we have new investment to develop initiatives to explore oil or explore new minerals in the same countries and in a particular territory that our governments consider that, because we have some ideas about the development model, it's possible to create or to transfer the impacts for these territories in name of the nation, in name of the country. And this kind of challenge, when we are talking about development, we consider that it's absolutely important or relevant to discuss in this particular moment, because Latin America is in a moment that need to explore some strategic minerals, for example, when we are talking about the energy transition, but at the same time, who will pay this count? Because it is a big count, but will be paid by the territories and particular communities. And in Latin America, it's important and it's very relevant to include the perspective of the indigenous people and the Afro-descendant quilombolas in Brazil, for example. And the next COP will be in the Amazon area, and we know that the participation of the indigenous people and quilombolas in the Amazon is absolutely important. And we have, at the moment, in a region, a higher inequalities, because it's not just economic inequality, it's at the same time inequalities thinking about the care time, to use the care time, for example, is a gender gap, and it's a combination between social and economic elements. And we have these problems with the tax systems that at the same time are reinforce the condition for the rich people. We have a very big problem about the democratic system in the region. This situation is not just discussed by OXFAM. You know that it's a very big discussion now around the world, because it's absolutely clear that the possibilities to participate in these international events or in these international spaces are totally different for the lobby of the companies or the perspective of the people in the territories or in the communities. And at the same time, we have a lot of problems now because the government are criminalize the activities of the people that is in activities to defend the nature of the rights. And this problem is increasing in the region and in our countries. This is because we consider that our reflection needs to combine these gaps in terms of inequalities, the gaps in terms of a development model. A second reflection related, of course, with the beginning is the agenda around just transition. Because most of the time, we have a very big confusion in our perspective, of course, because are talking at the same time about a broader agenda in terms of just transition that we need to do in Latin America, that is not just about energy systems or electricity model, and the specific agendas that one companies are promoted to create new markets or new business in specific sectors, in particular when we talk about electricity, because our perspective in terms of energy is that electricity is one of the topics that we need to discuss in terms of energy transition, but we need to talk about the food systems and the transport systems at the same time, because these three elements are part of the one agenda and the same agenda, not as separate topics. But of course, it's not a good business for some companies to support the problems that we need to discuss in terms of the hunger around the world. But it's a very, very good business to discuss new models for electricity or new conditions for these particular agendas in Latin America. And when I listened the panel, the previous panel today, for me it was absolutely clear that the model is working, but it is not working for all the people. And this is because for us it's absolutely key, the question that if this model is working for who? If not, we will be discussing topics like climate change or sustainable finance without the consideration of the most important political reflection around the imbalance that we have in terms of the power analysis that we need to do to understand what is the model that we are finally promoting when we are talking about these elements, and what will be our consideration to evaluate if the model is working or not working, if some finance are sustainable or not sustainable, what is the considerations to evaluate if this model are sustainable or not. This is because in our perspective, this debate about the agenda of just transition is absolutely necessary. It's important to discuss how the current development model are creating new violence conditions in the communities, and what kind of finance and what kind of sustainability we need to develop if we want to create new balance in terms of the power relationships between the countries and internal in our countries. And finally, a reflection about the current situation in the international negotiations, because we have a lot of a multiplicity of tools and spaces of negotiation. I mentioned two particular relevant spaces that are in the current debate in Brazil, the BRICS space and the G20. But we have a lot of voices in the middle of these spaces and a lot of interest in the middle of these spaces, and most of the time they are not in the same way, and most of the time in a different perspective and in a different way. We consider that we need to discuss, of course, the Bretton Woods system and the institutions that we have after the Bretton Woods system, but we need to discuss and we need to create a new institutionality when we are talking about development, but in particular when we are talking the challenges around the climate change conditions. Well, some ideas that I mentioned was a very big challenge for me to read in Spanish and to speak English at the same time, but I want to discuss after this.
Thank you very much, Carlos. I know everyone is hungry, but I think we can take 3 questions to begin with from the audience, please.
Yes, hi.
Your name, please.
I'm Rolando. Rolando Garcia from Argentina. So, what I want to ask you is, my question is both for Gabriela and Carlos. So, it's going to touch around with
Camila.
Gabriela. Is
Camila.
your name? Camila, sorry. Camila. I changed your name. Sorry about that. Well, we all been here since 9 a.m. So the question is, I found your presentation very interesting and inspiring, and I'm interested to for that report you mentioned. But I find it interesting to think in terms of classes when it comes to comparing responsibilities for emissions, for carbon emissions. I think that OXFAM tends to do that when you mention the elites. You are talking about social classes, and I'm constantly I come across constantly this kind of fact sheets stating that the 1% or 10%, the 5% is responsible for most of emissions, or 50% of emissions, or 30% of. It changes, but I wanted to know if that fact, if you have checked that, if you know something about that, you can add information to what we presented relating to social groups responsible for emissions. A short question about what you last said, Carlos. Is what's the supranational entity that we need to from society, civil society, or social movements, or whatever, that we need to push for our national countries to join to? Is it the BRICS? Who is pushing for this climate change agenda? Who is financing this climate change agenda in the contemporary times? You understand the question? I can ask it in Spanish.
Mario.
Okay, I'm trying to deal with because we have not much time. And tomorrow I'm going to present, so some questions are just part of my thoughts on the things we discussed. Thank you so much for the panel, for the presentations. I have two things in mind. One of them is that the decarbonization is not happening even with the huge investments in Europe and the US. Inflationary Act in the US and the Green New Deal in Europe were huge, and the levels of emissions are still growing. So I don't think that in Latin America we need to grow, but we have to think in the current system, within the current system, which is, I think that is predatory in the levels of consumption, production, and so on, how to deal with this problem. And the other thing related to that is that decarbonization or green transitions or so on arises a very big potential problem that has to do with the neocolonialism. You know? I am really afraid, for example, with the relationship, the friendship between Milei and Elon Musk, which is not fortuitous, which is not, it has not to do with the common views on economics, and has to do mainly with the needs of the go ahead with the minerals and so on. So how CEPAL and OXFAM are thinking about this?
See, I have a question here.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentations. My question is for Camila. It's very interesting, very good approach. I want to ask you that care economy is included in the idea of sustainability, and how the care economy can be a fundamental part of the sustainability model. And also, I want to ask if you know how the new development performance is putting in new or green investments in the South, because I know there's a big part of infrastructure, investment for infrastructure, but what kind of infrastructure we are seeing nowadays, and what will be the role of the new development bank for the approach to the South?
Okay.
I will give the floor to you first. Okay. No, I understood the question perfectly, but I don't have the answer. Yeah, because it's a big.
Even in Spanish or
No,
Portuguese,
it's not a problem with the language. It's a problem because, well, this is the question. I think that we are in the middle of this debate, not just on the regional level, but on the global level. But for me, it's clear that at the regional level, we need some commitments between our countries in Latin America to reinforce our positions in the international arena of the debate, not just for climate change, but for the different debates that we are doing in the international level. Most of the time, the Latin American countries are separate in the international debates, and for me, this is the most complex situation. And my area is the area of climate change. Most of the time, it's not possible to discuss a common position for the Latin American countries when we are talking about loss and damage, for example. That is a topic that you think that, well, it's easy to create a common consensus about the impact and the role and the relevance of the debate for loss and damage for Latin American countries, but it's not possible. Now, in my opinion, if we discuss an agenda, a regional agenda, and a new discussion about the regionalism model will be a very big, fantastic news for all of us. But this is not the current situation. In fact, maybe in some particular areas, people from Latin that knows the debates about the regional platform for fiscal tax debate in the region, for example, but more specific topics are not the broader agenda for the region. Sorry, but I don't have a good perspective for your questions.
Okay, so thank you very much for your questions, Rolando. On the responsibilities of emissions, we at CEPAL, we always make the case for the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. So, but it's a tricky question because, as mentioned, if we look at I'll always go back to the physical evidence of climate change. Humanity has to decarbonize. And although we need to point fingers and show where the problem is and where the origin is, the fact is that the largest portion of greenhouse gas emissions nowadays are being produced by developing countries. And this is why I'm speaking from a personal point of view. We have to do it, we have to address it from historical, from justice for the future generations. We have to point fingers and establish responsibilities, but we have to be careful in order to not to put this or frame this discussion in a way as to relieve our own responsibility in terms of what needs to be done. I can see it from the progressive field a lot in economics. It's something I insist, unfortunately. We have those estimates. For instance, we look at the average consumption of the countries and we see how many planets would be necessary if everyone in the world consumed like a North American, a European person, etc. And so, of course, we have to look at that. But that shouldn't be used as an instrument of negotiation to reduce our own responsibilities. The fact that there are so many reasons why we are locked in this fossil fuel intensive path that are beyond the responsibility of Latin America and the global South countries. Yes, let's look at that, but let's use that. This is again is my personal position, it's not CEPAL's. Let's use that to negotiate better terms. And this has implications for financing, for instance. This means that developed countries need to make good on their financial commitments. Not just that, because the countries are not meeting the official commitments on climate finance that they have committed to, but they have not reached the level of commitment that is necessary to finance the transition in the global South. And the second thing that global South countries, again, from a personal perspective, should be doing, and that Brazil is doing very well, having supported closely the processes from CEPAL, is linking COP30 to a wider multilateral agenda. So Brazil has taken over the presidency of the G20, of the BRICS, Mercosur for the second time now, and the strategy that Brazil is presenting is integrated. It's not a separate one for the G20, for the BRICS. And one of the things that Brazil is putting forward very strongly, with the support of various Latin American and global South economies, is the need for a reform in the global financial architecture. This is part of COP30, and it needs to be on the table because it talks about the responsibility and access to low cost or concessional finance in the sustainable development field. But a second thing that should be on the table, that Brazil is trying to put on the table, is support for reproductive development. As mentioned, even if we find the funds to finance all of the investments that we have, this would still mean vulnerabilities for global southern countries in terms of technological dependency. So Brazil achieved at the G20 for the first time ever in the Declaration of the Leaders, the inclusion of paragraphs on the need, not just for climate finance, but support, technical support, technological transfer and support for developing countries to develop their own, the term is green industrial strategies. It's green technological development. So it's a complex issue, but I hope I got to some of the points that I think are important. On Margarita's question about decarbonization not happening, I think it goes to the same point. It's very difficult for me, and as you know, I've been in this fight for years now. And I always recall a quote from Professor Ricardo Gramkow from USP, University of São Paulo. I asked him, because it's really frustrating to be on this agenda, do we have reasons to be optimistic, Professor? And he said, optimistic? Never. Hopeful? Always. And I think that this is about it. The political environment is very complex. The extremism is increasing. Military conflicts, trade war, it's difficult. The rise of the extreme right, threats to democracy. The environment is harsh. It's difficult to get agreement on anything, not just on climate change. But we have, again, this is my personal standing. I think that we as academics, we have to keep showing the evidence. It's possible, we can do it, our models show it. We can have better development performance with social inclusion, with decarbonization. It's viable. And I believe that we have so much more that we can do on this front. And we have to do it more coordinated, and we have to find a consensus ground where our voices can be heard. I think that academia has a fantastic role that should be strengthened and heard much more. And I'm sorry I missed your name. Andrea. On the care economy, this is a fundamental question. We at CEPAL have been increasingly incorporating the perspective of care, because it's revolutionary. And when we look at the world from a care perspective, is a solidarity perspective. It's about not just taking care of infants, childs, elderly, sick people, but it's also about taking care of this earth, Pachamama. No? It's a revolutionary way of looking at it. We are departing from a sectorial perspective. You can see in one of the boxes there was the care economy, which is health, education, all of the health infrastructure to reduce the time poverty of women, for example. We know about the extra workload on women and so many other things. I will not go into details, but we're moving from putting the care economy in a box that is fundamental in the context of climate change, but from a whole of economy perspective itself. Within the context of climate change, just like we saw with the pandemics, it is the women that will suffer most of the pressure from extreme weather events. The women are the first ones to abandon their jobs, to take care of the sick, to take care of the hurt people, to take care of the house. It is on them the burden of the damage and loss, and we are seeing that. We saw that in the Rio Grande do Sul. The violence also that women suffer on shelters as they lose their homes. So there is a lot of debate on the disproportionate effects, and this is something that we bear very closely in mind. About the New Development Bank, indeed what figures show is that new stakeholders in global financing are having a more aggressive stay on the green transition than the traditional ones. That is also true for New Development Bank, whose portfolio has been mostly concentrated on financing green infrastructure, mostly renewable energy.
Thank you very much, Camila. Luiz, Fernando?
Okay, just a short comment about Margaret mentioned the neo-colonialism. That's, I think that's this affects particularly also the Latin American region in terms of the renewable energy source. That's particularly in the south of South America, the exploitation of lithium, for instance, and also probably the green hydrogen in Brazil. Brazil has a huge potentiality to produce green hydrogen because we have a lot of clean energy, but the point is that what we are going to, if we are going to use green hydrogen for a green industrialization, or we are just producing inputs, cheap inputs for the global north. So that means that we are going to maintain the specialization model as a exporter of the commodities. So it is an open question that we have this sort of new colonialism. That's all. Just to say that before you finish this section, that you have a dinner now at 8 in Gal do Mar. Everybody here is invited to join us, please. And tomorrow we will begin at 9, the section, at 9. And also we will have a section at, there are a lot of sections tomorrow, but I would like to point out that at 11 a.m. we are going to have a section that will discuss how to have a sort of network of Latin American researcher institutions that we can join efforts in terms of our work. So we are open to ideas on how we collect our efforts for tomorrow. Okay, so please.
Before ending the session, I will make a brief pessimistic but not hopeless remark. I was recently during the G20 meeting in a conference, and during the conference there was a World Bank representative that said to us that the retained profits by oil companies during 1 year was enough to finance all investments necessary for the whole world in order to decarbonize and reduce poverty. And then I saw that, and I was looking at the companies, and 7% of the profit came from Brazil.
7%.
7%. And 7% of the profits came from Brazil. Wow, that's perfect. So I asked a question to the panel, saying, well, what about the 7%? What can we do? We are here in Brazil. Petrobras is a governmental enterprise. So what can we do? And there was, in the session, there was a panelist that came from the BNDES. And she didn't let anyone answer, and she answered. She said that the profits from Petrobras were going to be used in the equatorial margin. Equatorial margin. Oil companies have been divesting from alternative sources of energy. I think that we should be aware that we should be very pessimistic about the future. We are going to be exploiting oil more and more and more. And the money from oil is going to be used in new oil exploitation. And that's very hard to hear, and it's very hard. We need some actions in order to revert this tendency. And it's not going, we're not going well. Thank you very much.
Restaurante é Gal do Mar, aqui 10 minutos.